So we need to have a different kind of conversation around COVID-19. And there are two particular areas that I want to address with you guys today. Okay. The first one is the doctors and nurses. I'm really passionate about this. Now, those of you who know me well know that I have a bit of an affinity toward doctors and nurses because they are the healers of our society. Does that mean that every doctor is perfect or can do no wrong? There are plenty who have abused their position, but we all have a tendency to abuse our position, right? So here's the thing. What I do know is that when it counts, a lot of doctors in the emergency rooms, the surgeons, the the ones who are there on call, they're working hard. And having been in war zones, seeing hospitals in hostile environments, it's important to me that we honor them and honor the work that they do because they get forgotten. They really genuinely get forgotten. I remember being in Gaza in 2014 and just asking the doctor how he was. And he said he would go home in that hour or 2 hours he had a chance to go home and shower. And during the war, during bombs falling all around him and the hospital being overrun, and he would just sit by himself in another room, staring at a wall. His mental state was devastated. They go through mental health issues every day because they absorb everything, the blood and the gore. And I'm not just talking about a war zone, but I'm talking about the blood and gore that comes out of us when we are feeling our sickest and our lowest in the hospitals. Now, a woman in South Dakota, she tweeted out that one of the things that was breaking her heart were how many patients she was coming across that were contracting COVID-19 and to their very last breath were saying, it's not real, this can't be it. If you want to check out below, there are two links, one from The Hill and one from CNN. They had her on where she talked a little bit more about it. She said it's like a movie where the credits never roll and it's over and over again. And she understands that the patients aren't necessarily directly taking their anger out on her. But what happens is the doctors and nurses become the brunt of that anger, of that hatred, of that hurt, of that pain, of that denial. People who are in denial are going to refuse to see the abuse that they are putting on others. We have to value our doctors and nurses. Right now, COVID-19 is their war zone. The fact that in the United States, they have struggled to get supplies, they have had to, there's been competition about getting funding and money. This is a culture we've cultivated. And unfortunately, the current administration, who is there until the 20th of January, is still controlling the game. He's played puppeteer with our doctors and our nurses, with our healthcare system. We don't have universal healthcare like there are in other countries. Most of the world is looking at the United States, gawking at our healthcare system, how we treat. Our police officers get militarized upgrades while our doctors and nurses are having to figure out how to make their own masks because they can't get enough. They're not ordered enough. It's kept from them. Funding is kept from them. Now, there are people out there who'll say, oh, well, the doctors and nurses are really lying about the people who, die of COVID-19. No, they're not. The numbers are there. The problem is most people don't realize that if you do have another issue, COVID-19 will probably trigger it. And there are lots of diseases that are like that. It's not the same kind of disease, but essentially when a person is diagnosed with HIV, it essentially means that their immune system is gone so that they can contract other sicknesses, viruses, bacteria, all kinds of things that their body can no longer fight off. And so when the doctors say that someone died of COVID-19, yeah, maybe they had other issues. But if COVID-19 is the trigger, then we honor the death accordingly. The same thing for numerous other things. We need to honor them and the work that they're trying to do, that they're making an effort to do, the medicine that they're trying to be. as human beings. And that starts with us. That starts with how we value our represent. And we need to call in demand of our representatives. They come up with a stimulus plan. The stimulus plan is more than just an economic plan for you and I, although I've definitely done my share about preaching about that. The plan that needs to be agreed upon, that needs to be issued, the funding that needs to be put out there is funding that's going to help our hospitals. And not only that, we need to not make their work harder for them than it already is, which means we need to be taking care of ourselves. Now, I'm going to get to that in a minute because I want to talk a little bit more about that as well, our prevention strategy, so that we're not overrunning beds, so we're not having to build makeshift hospitals in fields or in parking lots. Let's address the pandemic first and foremost with a sense of honor with the frontline people who are actually doing the job and doing the work. That's essentially what I want to see first and foremost. And we do that by demanding that our government provide the assistance that hospitals need. And we do that by being considerate. And and we do that by taking care of ourselves. We do that by not contracting the disease, by not showing up at the hospital. And we do that by believing what they tell us. When they come outside and they tell us that this is what's happening, we believe them. We believe them. They're there, they're looking at it, they're watching it. They see what's happening and they're trying to the best of their ability, something we haven't even handled before. And the sniveling administration that we currently have is making it even worse on top of that. So let's talk a little bit about prevention, but also before we get to that, I want to talk about vaccines, okay? We are not having the right conversation around vaccines. We're not. It's almost as if we refuse to have the proper conversation about vaccines. So let me share a little something with you. I am not a pro-vaxxer. But I'm also not an ultra anti-vaxxer either. I believe in reasonable research and science. I believe in prevention, and I believe in the strength of our own bodies. Here's the thing. The average amount of time that it takes, I've heard from reliable resources, I've read in various resources, the average time it takes for a vaccine to really find its way into effectiveness can be anywhere from 1.5 years to 3 years, okay? And that depends on how strong the disease is. And it goes through stages. It's tested on rats. I've heard that it's tested on primates sometimes. It's tested then on humans. And then each one of those has different levels. Vaccines and the development of the right kind of chemical combinations and relationships is important. So anybody telling us that they have got the cure-all and the vaccine in 8 months, and it's 90% effective, I'm calling bullshit. So I want to challenge my news colleagues to actually have a different conversation. I was watching a German channel today in English, and the anchor actually brings on an analyst who is saying something very similar to why I am. We have a long way to go. We don't know. We need to check side effects. This is going to take a while and isn't actually might not be everything we think it is. And the anchor says to him, "Oh, well, let's just try and keep it positive, okay? So how long again?" And he's not the only one. I've heard it on American news organizations as well. There's big buzz and flair and banners and graphics championing this the race for the vaccine and showing 3 or 4 different companies who are all putting their money into it. Let me tell you something. Pharmaceutical companies are the biggest drug dealers in the world. We need to be more concerned about pharmaceutical companies than we do the guy selling cocaine around the corner or the other guy selling got more than a gram of weed in his pocket. Because they're the ones who are making money off of our addictions. And so their developments of vaccines are going to skip steps. And that's the fact. The more I read, the more I look into this, the more I am finding these companies are skipping steps. If the average vaccine for a disease that's lesser than COVID-19 takes, 2 years, then there's something missing. And yes, rich people are going to take advantage of it. They're going to put their money into it, and pharmaceutical companies are going to take it because they make so much money. And they're going to experiment on the wrong people. And they're going to rush to say there's a cure, and then more people are going to die, and then there's going to be side effects that we don't know. So I'm not jumping on the train of saying, hey guys, we've got a vaccine. I'm just not. And I'm not going to take it if they announce tomorrow that it's all figured out, because it's not. I want to see years of genuine research. And I know that people are afraid. COVID-19 is overwhelming. And the truth is, the people who are denying that they have COVID-19 while they're in the hospital with COVID-19, they're actually they're more in fear than the people who are like, you know what, I'm going to wear a mask. Those are the people who are in fear. They're so badly want to control the narrative. This is something I talk about frequently. People want to control the narrative. They're so desperate to have an answer. They're so desperate to know. They're so desperate to feel like they have to be controlling the world. COVID-19 is unfortunately something we can't fully control because we still don't know enough about it. We know more now than we did back in March, but we're still working it out. Which means if we're still working it out, guaranteeing a vaccine is going to take time. And honestly, I would challenge my news colleagues to have a different conversation, have a scientific one. Get people on who develop vaccines in the lab and who aren't bought out by companies like Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies. Get real people on to talk about that kind of stuff. Because what I'm seeing is a lot of graphics and a lot of cheerleading of we're going to have an answer, because there's so much fear around this that we don't know. But this leads me then to the idea of prevention. So the reason I bring up respecting and honoring our doctors and nurses, the reason I bring up honoring our medical teams, and the reason then I bring up the controversy over the vaccine, which in all honesty, my biggest concern is whether or not government entities are going to force it on people. Ironically, the state of New York and the state of California and the state of Washington and a couple others had initially said they wanted to have kind of their own investigations in it. They wanted to be able to have their own examination of the vaccine. And the current administration is going to prevent them from getting information and getting what they need in order to be able to do that, because he wants to punish them on a political level for not supporting him. And that's scary. And then we have to consider the idea that, are people going to be required to get a job, to travel? What kind of government, forces they're going to be put on that? We definitely need to stay abreast of that kind of thing and be concerned about it. But here's the other thing that I really want to focus on. It all drives home to prevention. It all drives it home. I took a rabbit trail there for a moment. But it all comes back to prevention. How do we best honor our medical teams? Don't get COVID-19. It's more than just wearing a mask when you go to the grocery store. I'm not even concerned about that. I mean, yes, do it, but to me, that's lesser of an issue. How do you eat? What kind of food are you putting into your body? Are you eating a lot of processed food? How do you eat meat? Do you get it from factory farms, or do you hunt and get it? Not everybody's a hunter, but you can buy organic meat. It's actually been grass-fed. What if we stood up to the corporations that are mass producing meat that is essentially slop? Our relationship with animals need to change. There needs to be an honoring of the animal, an honoring of the plants and the earth that we live in, so that we can not just stay alive, but we can actually have a quality of life. And I understand that that plays into a conversation about what people can afford and, economics and all of those kinds of things. I'm not going to go through all of that. But what I am going to say is that there are ways for us to revolutionize how we care for our body. Are you even trying to exercise a little bit every day? Are you doing breath work? Are you finding ways to stay healthy? Do you stay at home and not go to crowded spaces? What do you do to take care of yourself? When you begin to take care of yourself, when you begin to honor your own body, honor your own being, you can honor the doctors and nurses by not getting it and entering to the hospital and overwhelming them. Believe what they say and believe what your body tells you it needs, rather than dumping stuff on it. Take care of your mind. How many of you are doom scrolling on a regular basis and going from one thing to the next and getting caught up in things that are making you more afraid of one thing or another? Focusing less on the issues that matter to you or to your community or on a national level. How are you feeding your mind? We have to begin to take preventative care of our own body and minds. And when we do that, we can honor the medical team. And when it comes to the vaccine, when we have a perspective that modern science isn't bad, but there are holistic ways that, by the way, Asian countries have been doing for thousands of years. And that our own First Nation brothers and sisters. Truth is, white people brought them diseases. So maybe we need to relearn how to connect with our body, connect with our mind, and connect with the earth in the way that we eat animals, if you're a meat eater, in the way that we eat vegetables, in the way that we exercise, in the way that we just care for ourselves. And allow the process of vaccine development to take its course. Not rush to something because we're so afraid and we need to have it now. If it's good, if it's effective, give it time. We know things like polio and measles vaccines, these work. Why? We've had decades to see that they do. But how much are we giving vaccines that we've developed even in just the past 50 years? When I was a kid, there were maybe half a dozen vaccines that we got. And now in some states, there's 20 or 30. Why is there so many? Why aren't we having real conversations? I spoke to a friend who said they heard a radio show say they'll never talk to an anti-vaxxer. Again, being ultra pro-vaxxer or ultra anti-vaxxer, in my mind, neither one of those are actually beneficial because neither one of them is honoring the other person. One isn't honoring the natural order of things, and the other one isn't honoring the fact that there are genuine developments in science and medicine. And there has to be a balance. How do we get the pendulum to be in the middle? Why does it have to be one thing or the other? And why can't we have real conversations? And journalists and news people, you're part of this too, because you're leading those conversations and then people are doom scrolling on your websites. So you have to be willing to have those conversations on your radio shows, on your TV screens, reasonable conversations. Because there's something to be said for preventative care and how we approach everything from medicine to holistic living. We honor ourselves, we honor our minds, and then we can honor other people. We can honor the people who are on the front line fighting this thing. I worked in war zones, and you saw what doctors went through just to get through a day when it didn't seem like the number of patients coming would stop. And it's interesting because on a very different level, we're seeing Italian doctors, American doctors, European doctors who are facing a similar crisis. And this time, it isn't the gash of blood from a bullet or a knife wound from a battlefield or an explosion. This time, it's the inside of the body that's been infected by something that doesn't belong there, that it wasn't created to hold. And it wasn't created to hold, and the reason that it ended up in our human bodies is because we didn't take care of the animals that it came from, whose bodies use it in a different way. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. And I'm not, a holistic expert, but I respect all three. And I want to encourage and challenge you to have a different conversation. Don't be an ultra pro vaxxer or an ultra anti vaxxer. Actually, the conversation around vaccines that should be happening is, what is the government and what are the pharmaceutical companies going to do with it to continue to lie and get away with what they do, which is going to cause more problems in the future. And for God's sakes, call your representatives and demand that they approve a stimulus package, because part of that stimulus package is getting money to the hospitals. And let's reduce the number of people that are entering those hospitals and start taking care of ourselves as well. It's all connected. It's all tied together. Sorry to have gone so long, but I really just wanted to share this. I hope that you'll share it with your communities well. Feel free to reach out to me if you have thoughts or questions. We just need to keep having better conversations. Peace and love.